Hey there, everyone. It's Katie. I'm back. I'm here to talk about travel, scuba diving, and becoming a better version of yourself. In this episode, I want to talk about boundaries, setting boundaries without guilt. And this has been a hard one for me because it's my biggest blind spot. So instead of trying to explain boundaries perfectly or like explain, I guess, just explaining my thought process around boundaries, I'm just gonna tell you a story. This is from one of my old restaurants I used to work at. We worked in a resort town, so one of the first things I remember being odd, which now I understand it, but well, that's not true. I don't understand it. It's that it became the norm. It's just the norm in resort towns is that for holidays, for example, like Christmas is coming up, and basically you cannot ask for holidays off. No Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, like any holiday, you are expected to be available and working if you're on the schedule. And my very first season there, I remember thinking like, well, that's wild. What if someone wants to go home for Christmas? And it was like this unspoken rule that nobody goes home for Christmas. And a lot of people are from, different areas of not only the United States, but the world, because we would get a lot of workers from outside of the country who would come help us during the seasons. And so to me, not being able to take a holiday off, especially at that time because I don't know if I had ever had a, I don't know if I've ever had to like work a holiday day, so it was very wild to me. And then after a while, I realized, after a few years, you realize holidays are when you make the most money. So it's kind of like people agree to it because, yeah, that's when they're gonna make their best paycheck is during the holidays. So that was just one thing that really struck me in the beginning. Um, and then what started happening for me at this job is first of all, it was like you work holidays, it's just expected. Well, then, because our seasons were about 4 or 5 months long, and of course people get sick. It's like every time you tried to call in sick, you couldn't. The answer was no. You had to come in anyway. I remember a few times I was like coughing and sneezing and like really sick, and I tried to call out, and it was just like, no, you can't. Like, we're short-staffed. You have to come in. So that kept happening. And then suddenly, not suddenly, but after a while, like I started to get really good at my job. I knew where everything in the building was. I was training other employees. I was kind of leading the team, especially with like side work and things like that. And so I really became like this leader, I guess, of the group, me and a couple of the other servers. And since we were constantly, I feel like a little short-staffed in like the management department, like no one really wanted to manage or supervise because they made so much less money and the expectation for them to work was so much higher. And so it was pretty rare to get people to work in management, at least for like a long period of time. Or if they did stay for a while, they got their what's the word I'm looking for? Experience. They got their experience and then they moved on, because management just didn't get paid very well. And so me and a couple other servers were kind of taking on like basically being supervisors, managing the floor, managing the chaos, again, training new crew, new staff, handling situations that were happening like during lunch or dinner. There might be different situations that would happen, and we would have to like go help another server, or we would have to take over, or just different stuff. And it was all kind of like above and beyond what all the other servers were doing. We were kind of in this like leadership role that we didn't ask to be in. So after a while, I started asking management and the higher ups, hey, can we create this lead server position? That way we can still make tips and still make money essentially, but get paid a little bit more an hour so that we're being compensated for like this extra um work that we're putting in, like leading the team and all this stuff. And I kept getting denied, kept getting denied. I'd bring it up, I don't know how often. I know I would bring it up in my reviews. And after a while, and they just kept denying it. Oh, we don't have the budget for it, or um, different excuses. So I remember at one point, I think I was just kind of burnt out because I kept getting called in when people were sick. I kept getting expected to handle events because I was the only one who knew how to do it or things like that. And I would try to say no, and then they would guilt trip me into coming in. And yeah, I was like, the expectation was super high, but the pay, I was still being paid as a normal server, just like everybody else on the floor. And so one thing that happened was one of my annual reviews came, and I had, I don't know, maybe 6 months prior to this, or maybe it was only a few months, I had decided, I'm like, well, if I'm not going to get compensated for leading the team and being basically a supervisor that's not a supervisor, I'm going to do exactly what my job description entails. So I stopped overcompensating or overextending myself. And in my review, it showed suddenly like I was getting dinged on all these things. And it's like, you're not taking initiative, you're not leading the team, you're not, um, I can't remember. There was one thing too that like had leadership or supervision like in the actual wordage. And I verbally and then I also physically wrote, I was like, I don't agree with this review because this is not a review of my job description as a server. I'm being expected to be a supervisor, manager, but I'm not being compensated for that role. So I shouldn't be reviewed as that role. And that was kind of like and I think I once again asked for a lead server position to be part of like our team, and they wouldn't do it. So finally, I ended up taking a job a job or two at different places, other restaurants, and I started working at other restaurants. And it was the only time where I stopped getting called to cover for sick people. I stopped getting called to come in because like a special guest was coming or a special client event was happening or whatever. Like they finally stopped calling because every time they called, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm working my other job. And I was, but it was like the only no that they would accept. Before it was like, oh, but you have the time. I know you're off today, but we'll make it up to you next week. We'll make it up to you next month. Like literally there was like a whole entire month where I didn't get a day off, I remember. And I feel like that happened several times. And I started noticing like these other restaurants, they were making a schedule with days off, and then they were respecting the days off. Like you might get a call to come in and work because someone's sick, but you said no, and that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't treated as like a negotiation point. At the other job, the first job, you'd say no, and all of a sudden it's like, well, just come in for 2 hours. Just we'll do this, we'll do that to make it up for you, to make it up to you. It was treated, the no was treated as a negotiation. And then you'd feel guilty because you're saying no. And so you'd end up coming in anyway. But these other restaurants I started working at, I would say no, and suddenly that was the end of the conversation. And it was like this wild feeling to me because it's like, wow, they actually respected my no. And so I just, it was it was such a big learning process for me. It took a long time because, like I said, boundaries have been my blind spot. And what I realized is that it wasn't that my boundaries became valid. What changed was that I stopped being endlessly available. And when I stopped being endlessly available, suddenly, like, I had time again. I had time to enjoy um, time off and exploring the place and doing all the things I enjoyed doing in that space. And yeah, it's interesting to me how much um, setting boundaries feels guilty to me, makes me feel guilty, and because for so long my lack of boundaries was benefiting everyone, was benefiting this whole restaurant except me. And yeah, it's been a tough, tough pattern to unwind, like to start to see my blind spots. So to unwind the pattern and to act on it and start really um recognizing also also like just that I want my time back, just because I'm really good at something. I was really good at my job, so I was always asked to keep coming in. And after a while, it was like, no, like, I don't want to be the one that's called. And it's not that I wanted to do a poor job. I wanted to continue doing a good job just with more time back, more time for myself, more time to enjoy the things I want to enjoy because essentially I was hitting burnout. I was hitting a spot of like not wanting to go to work and not wanting to work for that restaurant, which was really sad because it was such a fun place to work. So that's uh that's my story around boundaries. And I hope that, I don't know, something was relatable. And yeah, put something in the comments if you've ever had similar situation or um yeah, just want to talk about it. Hope you guys have a great day. Bye.